I'm not going to put that on the video. There we go. Starting over.
Getting centered.
Okay, welcome back, everybody.
Messing with me.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm here with Karen White of Divine Time Astrology, divinetimeastrology.com. We've been doing a series on how the planets can generally impact your relationships based on how they are in the chart. I've done numerous talks with Karen, both podcasts. We've done a class together, the AtmaKaraka and Soul Planet and Relationships course, which is available as a download both at divinetimeastrology.com and astrovedicastrology.com. So far, we've talked about the Sun, Moon, and Mars. And this week, we're going to be talking about Mercury, which is really one of the most important planets for long-term relationship. You know, everyone seems to say, look at Jupiter, look at Venus, look at Mars, which are the obvious ones for relationships. But Mercury is so important for long-term relationships because it shows your ability to be friendly with your partner, your ability to be playful with your partner, your ability to communicate well with your partner, your ability to manage the differences, the different even ideas that you and your partner might have. So that's really the stuff that people who have long-term, long-lasting relationships, I think typically realize is most important because, you know, as life goes, we all get older, our desires change, our ideals change, and as long as you can not take things too seriously and still be friends, that's a really blessing to have in relationships. So anyway, enough of that. Welcome back, Karen. It's good to see you again.
You too.
Yeah. Okay. So I had my little intro about Mercury and why I think it's so important. So from your experience, I know you do a lot of relationship astrology. And as we talked about in earlier videos, you're interested in going through charts to help people understand their relationships called relationship autopsies.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's for past relationships, the ones that didn't work out.
Right. But that helps you learn about for future ones, right?
Exactly. And learn an awful lot about yourself.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I have a reading called Ready for Love.
Oh, right.
And that's where I do evaluate all the planets.
Okay.
You know, not just Venus, not just the obvious ones, but
Right.
and Mercury is important. Sure. In fact, for some people, they may actually make Mercury more important than it should be in a romantic relationship.
In a romantic relationship, is that what you said?
In a romantic relationship, yeah, because some people are so good at being friends with others that their partner can feel, because the difference between Venus and Mercury is that Mercury is more impersonal. You know, you'll put up with all kinds of stuff from your friends,
right,
or even from your relatives that you won't put up with or even want to be around in a romantic partner. So, but a person who is way too much, you know, Venus-y, meaning that it's all about romance and they can't just hang out and have fun,
right,
and do other kinds of things together, then that's a problem too. You know, or like there are people who can't be friends with their exes, for instance. Like that's just impossible, which is, I think, an unfortunate thing. Because this is a person that you really loved at one time, and who loved you. I mean,
maybe, but isn't it okay to leave those crazy ones behind?
Well, of course. I'm talking. You know, I'm just talking about people who are. I know. I mean, why continue to be antagonistic?
Right.
What's the point of that? So, and so anyway, like my current husband and I, we started our relationship as friends. I met him in high school. I was 16, and we met in a reading class. And we both love to read. So
wait a minute. You met when you were 16, and this is, you said your current marriage. So what state did you live in that you got married a little earlier than 16?
Oh, no, what I find interesting about that, this is more about Jupiter, but
okay.
Jupiter matures at 16, and for a woman, Jupiter is the husband. And I met my husband when I was 16.
Interesting.
So at the time, I had no idea, no clue whatsoever that it would someday become my husband.
Okay, so it wasn't that you had been together since you were 16 and you'd had a marriage sometime between 12 and...
Yeah, no, I married somebody else first. That's my point. We were friends for a really long time.
Right.
And, just the timing was right. And we got together. And the first thing that we were more worried about than anything else was that by making the relationship, taking it to a romantic level, would we ruin the friendship? Mm-hmm. We were more concerned about whether or not there would still be a friendship at the end of it, if there was an end to it, if we couldn't make that part work. Yeah. And so that was an agreement that we made. Right. And that is, if being married was going to ruin our friendship, to the point where we couldn't stand the sight of each other anymore, right, then we would break up just to keep the friendship. And now, I don't know how that's making Mercury very important, I would say.
Well, I would say that, also probably having Mercury in a good dignity, maybe in the 4th house, and Mercury maybe being exalted in a person's Navamsha, that maybe that could also...
Are you looking at my chart?
No, I'm not. I'm just making stuff up.
Yeah, I do. I have Mercury exalted opposite the Swamsha.
Yeah.
For people listening, means the AtmaKaraka in the Navamsha. Okay, that becomes the Swamsha. And you look at the planet or the sign opposite the Swamsha, right, to give you an idea of what your spouse is like. And then, of course, my husband, he has Mercury and Gemini in an angle. So, and his 7th house, actually. So it's very important to him too, obviously.
Yeah. And so it makes sense that for you that worked well. Right.
Yeah. So
that was a good thing. And I mean, do you find that you still can communicate and talk to each other and have decent conversations? I mean, is that...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Totally. So, I enjoy talking to him. Yeah.
So you don't, you're not one of the folks that when you go out to eat, you're just sort of like...
Well, we are capable of just being quiet too. We're not, we don't always have things to say, but we do things together. So, and then we talk about it later, like right, before we go to sleep, I'll say something to him like, so what do you think, that character in the movie was trying to do? And then we'll just have like this really interesting conversation. Right.
Yeah, that's good. That's good, yeah. Because that allows that communication to continuously be there, which is, again, important for relationships, because too often I think people, they don't put enough attention on that Mercury and they put it all on the passion.
Yeah.
And once those hormones wear off, 7 to 11 months later, right, there you are in a relationship and you don't have that thing that you share in common. So oftentimes when I counsel people, when I look at their Mercury and I see they've got a nice strong Mercury and they're asking about relationships, I'll tell them, go join meetup.com. Don't get on these dating sites where everyone's looking for the one, that Rahu Venus thing.
Right.
But where you're going to meet someone who you love playing board games, go join the board game meetup. And maybe you're going to meet the person that you can relate to on a mercurial level. And now you just have the rest of your life to spend with someone that you can play board games with. I mean, that's what a lot of people have.
Yeah, that's really I think that's excellent advice.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Go somewhere where you just are having fun.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Because if you've got a strong Mercury, that is important. Right. Yeah. Just like what we talked about with Mars in the previous video. People who have a strong Mars, they got to have a strong inspiration or goal to meet, so for people with a strong Mars, maybe they need to have the goal to raise their kids well, or the goal to save up and buy a great house, or the goal to build a business together, or the goal to, be able to travel around the world after they retire. So everyone, when you're thinking about, the planets in your chart, I found that the strongest ones, those are going to be the ones that ideally it would be great to share that with a partner and have that same kind of energy or that same kind of quality. Whether it's a malefic planet or a benefic planet, doesn't matter, because at least you understand each other.
Yes, I agree. Mm-hmm. And then there's the other side.
Okay.
Just people who...
You're awful combative today.
What's that?
You're awful combative today. Always the other side.
That's Mars and Gemini.
Yeah. Well, mine's there too, so it's all right.
I know.
Yeah.
How funny. No, I've heard people complain about a spouse who puts their friendships above their marriage.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So back to the pecking order thing, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
There's a pecking order, and that is the marriage. It comes before your friendships,
Mm-hmm.
and it comes before even your friendship with your spouse,
Right.
because it's a very specific kind of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have to attend to the passion and all that kind of stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to like each other.
Right.
And the friendship, the Mercury part, is liking each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I do. I like my husband.
Well,
so
Mercury, this is the other thing when we're thinking about it in our charts, is that, liking each other is good, but Mercury, since you mentioned earlier that you'll put up with things from your friends that you won't put up with from, like, your spouse or your whatever.
Yeah.
But the thing about Mercury when it comes to relationships is that when it's in decent dignity, when it's in maybe an angle or a try, I'm just going to use that as a general statement for positivity because most people look at it that way. It's more likely that a person has the capacity to let the other person be who they are. And you'll find that in Mercury in anyone's chart, when you get a really well-placed Mercury, they can be friends with people of different faiths. They can be friends with people who like different kinds of music. They can be friends with people who have radically different views on all kinds of really intense topics, because they're able to understand that this person has a point of view, I have a point of view. It's all just a different point of view. And so by having Mercury well situated in a chart, if you have problems, not you, Karen, but the people we're talking to, if you have problems, you've got problems. If you have problems where you can't let your partner be who they are or explore what they want to explore, or if they've got a little bit different thought than you and that drives you nuts,
mm-hmm.
It may be that something's going on with that Mercury, and then you have to develop that, which is what? Just learning to try to allow people to be who they are and love them anyway.
Yeah. Tolerance.
Yeah, tolerance. And tolerance is part of it, but I like to take it a step further to go beyond tolerance, because tolerance to me...
Go to acceptance.
Yeah, to acceptance, because tolerance to me is, I'm going to tolerate you in my house, but I really don't want you here.
Yeah, that's true.
But acceptance is, you're different than me, and hey, I'm different than you, so that's okay. And when Mercury is really good, typically the person can allow that breathing room in relationships for there to be other friendships, for you to have friendships, to have different viewpoints, and at the end of the day, just realize, hey, I love you, you love me, and we get along, right?
Yeah.
So we always got to be careful with this Mercury, and if you do have Mercury in difficult dignity, or getting starved by the moon, or if it's with Saturn, that can make you a little too focused on your own personal needs, and doesn't allow you to see the other viewpoints in the world, because they're equally as valid. That's what drives me nuts. I'm going to go on a tirade, then I'm going to stop here for a minute.
Okay, go ahead.
but what drives me nuts, especially with things like astrology, when people say one type of astrology is best, so that automatically indicates that every other type of astrology is inferior.
Yeah.
Or if people say this guru or this meditation path is the best, well, that automatically invalidates everyone else's choices that are different than yours. Right?
Right.
So, a good Mercury is able to make a statement without invalidating everyone else's stuff. So whatever planet is with Mercury, that's typically going to show how you communicate things. And if it's with Mars, you're probably going to be an idealistic, dry person. Yeah. If it's with Jupiter, you're going to tend to be a little more accepting of others. So we gotta consider this too. How is Mercury getting influenced? Because he will act like any planets he is with.
Right.
And that can really impact how we relate to our partners.
Yeah, no kidding.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, that's okay. I've got one more thing to say.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
I think I need notes here.
Yeah, so when we think about Mercury, especially when we take it to the Navamsha, the D9, dealing with things like our life path, our purpose, our marriage, and so on. Well, Mercury shows our ability to manage our life path and our marriage. And we have to remember that marriage is very important, but is not the only facet of who we are. And so when we have a good Mercury in the D9, again, we're just going to generally say blanket statement, even though it needs to be more specific than this, angles, trines, and good dignity, that a person will be able to say, I know that, based on my marriage, that I can spend Tuesday night and Thursday night with my friends. But Wednesday night, I need to be home, with my spouse, because that's important to manage both. Or I know I've got this hobby that I just love and it just makes me so happy, but I also know I need to have this balance. So I have to manage doing my hobby with growing and enriching my relationship. So when we think of Mercury in the D9, that's going to give us typically a really good indicator of how well overall can a person manage to be an individual, to manage to have other interests in life, but also to be able to nurture and support their relationships as well, their long-term commitments.
Right. And when I see the Mercury in the Navamsha too, it tells me if they're able to have a friendship together.
Right.
They can do things together if they want to develop skills together.
Mm-hmm.
Because Mercury rules skills as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it rules the arts. It rules crafts and that kind of thing. And that's something that people can usually do together.
Right.
Some kind of mutual interest, like you were saying, board games,
mm-hmm.
or developing skills, like say taking a cooking class together.
Right.
And you get to know your partner in ways that you wouldn't get to know them. Or having a social life too, because Mercury is friends
mm-hmm.
and it's relatives. And it's always good to have some interaction as a couple with other couples,
right.
with other people, with their relatives, because what's interesting about it is it helps you to see your partner as being separate from you,
mm-hmm.
as an individual of their own, and you get to enjoy them in a different way.
Exactly.
It's really fun, and you see things you didn't see before. It can, it's kind of like when you're married or you're in a relationship, you go through cycles with that person.
Mm-hmm.
And, you go through cycles where you feel like the ebb and flow, right? You feel kind of far away and a little bored, and which happens inevitably over time.
Right.
If you bring Mercury into it, like you bring people into it, you bring a new skill into it, a new interest or something fun, because Mercury rules fun too,
mm-hmm.
then you get to fall in love with your partner again,
mm-hmm.
but in a totally different way.
Right.
So that's another great thing about Mercury.
Well, you mentioned skills, right? And I think that's important because oftentimes when we get in relationships, who we are and what we're interested in before we start the relationship can be very different 5, 10, 15 years in. And you can actually learn skills just by being in a relationship with someone different than you, right? Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. My wife is not really interested in astrology in the sense of studying it. Mm-hmm. She definitely wants me to do her chart and everything. But, when someone starts talking to me about astrology, she will start talking about it. And she'll be right. Like she'll answer questions better than many students that I have. And that's only because she hears me talk about it a lot. Like when I'm teaching classes at home, maybe she's reading over on the couch or something. So she hears it. And so just by us being together, she's learned astrology. Right. And by me being with her, I've learned all kinds of skills. And one of them is to be more polite and tactful, which is true. Like when I think about how I was earlier on, pre-relationship and stuff. And I've learned to listen to her when it comes to social engagements and diplomacy and things. And, one thing I've learned from her is to be a little more tactful, to be, have a little bit more manners, things of this nature.
So she has a good Venus then.
Yeah, she's got an exalted Venus. So
there you go. Okay.
Yeah, that's what does it. And in that situation, when we think about Mercury, the Mercury in a person's Navamsha, possibly. Now remember, we have to really read the chart as a whole. So these are generalities. Can show how are you going to develop skills in the relationship? Not just skills to have the relationship. Are you going to do things with a partner that you learn things? You learn things just by being in the relationship, by sharing information,
Yeah, in fact, I know a lot of women, including myself, where one of the things they look for in a mate is the ability to learn something from him.
Right.
We like to, and men tend to like to teach too. When they know something, they like to teach. And I know for myself, with Mercury being opposite my Swamsha, that's one of the high values for me, and that is intelligence in a man, because Mercury represents a certain type of intelligence.
Right.
And my husband's Mercury is better than mine. He's much more detail oriented.
Okay.
And I'm not. So, before I send out a blog post, I ask him to look at it.
Right.
He always sees something that I didn't see, even though I read it over 5 times.
Right.
But, so that's what I want to say about that.
Right. So Mercury plays a big role in relationships. And I think that by understanding that and trying to figure out ways to develop that and honor that can really help a relationship work well. Again, that whole idea of accepting each other, being friends with each other, and also having the capacity to be an individual, like you were saying, like when you go out and socialize with people, you get to be not just in the relationship.
Yeah.
And Mercury also can give a great capacity to have the time to spend apart together. Because, if you got a good Mercury yourself, well, you can find something to do. Mercury people have no problem finding something to do.
This is true.
Yeah. But if you've got a weaker Mercury, you may seem to be more dependent on the people around you to find something to do. So in a way, in a secondary fashion, you want to be very cautious of being kind of like dependent on the others if your Mercury isn't so good, to define yourself. Because think about it. Mercury, he said to take on the energies of any planet that he's with, right?
Yes.
So that can also show that when Mercury is deficient or has some difficulty, the person might be seeking out their sense of self by relating to someone, whoever it might be, right? So learning to have time apart in relationships and being okay with that, to find out who are you as an individual, that can also help to develop your Mercury, if it's possible, because not everyone can pull that off, but it is helpful, I think, to try.
Right. Now, sometimes too, I have clients who tell me, I'm always the friend. Mm-hmm. They never see me as the love object.
Right.
They see me as a pal. Mm-hmm. Well, that's an example of Mercury being maybe too prominent in a person's heart, and their Venus being underdeveloped, or maybe even their Mars. Mm-hmm. Where they're just too friendly and nice and easy, and there's no challenge to them.
Right.
Of kind. So if you're the kind of person who's always the pal, then you don't have to develop your Mercury. It's better for you to work on, Venus and maybe Mars, and but you can use your Mercury to learn relationship skills, or attraction skills is really what that comes down to, is to, how to be the love object, the beloved, and then be the friend.
Right.
Even though a lot of times that's the favorite game of the person who has that issue, is they do the long game, right? Well, we'll be friends first. Right. And then after they get to know me, well, of course they'll fall in love with me, right? Yeah. That depends. Mm-hmm. That depends on if you have some of those other skills or not. Right. So, and there's tons of books and stuff on that subject.
Well, you bring up the good point. We'll go ahead and probably finish up with this point before we move on to Jupiter. And that is the point that with Mercury and with all planets, that we are just talking about a planet individually here. Mm. There are, other planets in the chart. So sometimes the things that we mention as strong or weak versions of a planet, as Karen was saying, it could just be a deficiency or an overcompensation with another planet. Right. You know what I'm saying? So we do have to be very cautious not to jump to any conclusions here, but she brings up the great point that you need to learn about all the planets and essentially do your best to develop all the planets as in a balanced fashion as possible for these things to work in their ideal situation, right? Right. Right. So we have all these different organs in the body for a reason. We couldn't just have a heart. We need them all to be functioning together. So yeah. Okay.
And if you have a really weak Mercury, don't despair. It doesn't mean that you can't have a good relationship. There's a million ways. The divine has made it possible for us to learn how to do just about anything. Mm-hmm. Seriously. And that's what astrologers are for, is to help
you do anything.
Just to help you understand yourself.
Yeah, you got a car problem, come to your astrologer.
Well, maybe Ryan, he has a car prominent. Are you good at mechanics? Are you mechanical?
I can change your timing belt. That's about it.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, and Karen spends a lot of time exploring relationships and so on. So if you have an interest in, if you've listened to this video and you think, oh crap, my planets are messed up, I'm never going to have a relationship, well, I would advise getting a session with Karen to do the relationship autopsy of your past relationships, or just have her help you explore how to develop those things. Because number one, you can tell she likes talking about this stuff and she's good at it. And number three, it's always better to explore these things with your own chart specifically, with a professional who's been doing it a while, versus just watching a video and trying to come to your own conclusions and coming to the wrong conclusion.
Yeah, because we're complicated beings.
Yeah.
We really are.
And you need objectivity, right? It's like people who self-diagnose all the time. Use these videos as just a guide to get a sense of, well, what's the possibilities here? At the end of the day, go see Karen.
Oh, you know what? I just thought of something. One last thing, really important about Mercury.
Yeah.
A sense of humor.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mercury is the sense of humor.
Yeah, so you can take a joke.
Just about any woman I've ever talked to about what they look for in a man, they almost always say, first thing, sense of humor. They want a guy who's not going to take things really seriously.
Right.
And to be able to laugh at himself and laugh at life.
Right.
Sometimes it's all you can do.
Well, if only women had more of a sense of humor.
We do. We find men very, very amusing.
I'm sure. Well, if you really want to please your man, when he has gas, chuckle with him. See? See?
Well, the longer you're together, the easier it is to do that sort of thing. That's the body, right?
Illustration right there of the problem. We think that farting is funny, and when don't.
Well, it's mostly because we have to deal with the after. Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note.
Yeah, well, that's a very deep and profound conversation we're having here.
Hey, it's Mercury, right?
Right.
We don't need deep and profound. We need funny and trivial.
That's true.
Anyway, all right. So we'll conclude here. You can find out more about Karen at divinetimeastrology.com, and we will be moving on to, looks like, Jupiter in our next session. So we'll see you next week with Jupiter.
Bye.
See you later.
Man. So let me ask you something. Do you have